Have you ever felt like, just when you decide to change, everything starts to go wrong? It's as if the universe, instead of helping, decides to put obstacles in your way every step of the way. Things that were previously under control seem to fall apart. People walk away, doors close, and in the midst of this turmoil, you start to doubt whether you're really on the right path or whether you should give up on everything. But what if I told you that this moment of chaos is not a sign of failure? It's a sign of transformation. Before continuing, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Here we talk about self-knowledge, transformation, and awakening of consciousness. If this resonates with you, subscribe now so you don't miss the next content. Back to the topic at hand. What we call tests from the universe may actually be the symbolic language of life preparing us for a new reality. It is a silent invitation to cross an internal portal. And this is where Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who dedicated his life to studying the mysteries of the human mind, comes in. For him, the suffering we feel in moments like these is the push we need to stop being who we pretend to be and start becoming who we really are. This video is a roadmap for this process. Let's walk together through these phases of deconstruction and rebirth, understanding what's really going on inside you and how all of this can be leading you to a much more authentic life. The illusion of control and the call for change. We often believe that we have everything under control, that if we follow a certain script, studying, working, maintaining relationships, avoiding conflict, everything will go smoothly. This feeling of stability is comfortable, but behind it often lies something that Carl Jung called the persona. The persona is the social mask we wear to survive in the world. It is the self we present to be accepted, loved, and respected. It is useful, but it is also limited. The more we identify with this mask, the further we move away from who we really are. And it is precisely when this persona begins to wear out that we feel life going off track. The loss of a job, the end of a relationship, a sudden existential crisis. These may all seem like bad luck or injustice, but from a deeper perspective, these events are signs that the structure of the persona is no longer supporting your inner truth. The universe, or the unconscious, as Jung preferred to call it, is beginning to push you out of this false safety zone. This is where the first tests appear. They don't come to punish, they come to break the false sense of control that has been built on external expectations, old traumas, and roles that no longer make sense. The pain of loss, the anxiety of change, and the fear of the unknown are signs that something inside you is ready to emerge. But before that, you need to let go of what you are no longer. It's like being in a house that always seemed safe, but now it's starting to show cracks. The first reaction is to try to fix it, keep it standing, preserve what always worked. But the more you try to hold on to the old, the more it crumbles. And it's in this crumbling that the real call for change begins. This call is subtle but profound. It comes in the form of discomfort, of a restlessness that won't go away, of a weariness that isn't physical but existential. It's your deepest self, asking for space to breathe, to exist. And that takes courage. Courage to drop the mask, to abandon the script, to acknowledge that you're not in control, and perhaps never have been. But that's where the beauty of this process lies. When you begin to realize that trials are not interruptions to the path, but the path itself, something inside you changes. A new perspective is born. And slowly, you begin to ask yourself, what if all of this is happening to reveal something to me that I cannot yet see? It is at this point that the inner journey intensifies. You begin to walk toward the unknown, guided not by certainties, but by a silent intuition that there is something more authentic, more true, more yours. And as we'll see in the next chapter, this something else often begins to manifest itself through chaos. A chaos that comes not to destroy but to reorganize, to break down what no longer serves and make room for what is to come. When chaos is the messenger. Do you remember the last time everything seemed to be falling apart? When all of a sudden your life turned upside down and none of your usual strategies seemed to work. These moments are no coincidence. For Jung, they mark the beginning of an inner journey, and the guide for this journey is often chaos. Before continuing, if this content already makes sense to you, leave your like right now. This helps the channel reach more people who are going through the same transformation process. Now, let's understand the role of chaos in this path. In Jung's view, the human psyche is made up of many layers, and not all of them are conscious. When we live only through the persona, hiding parts of ourselves to fit in, pressure begins to build in the unconscious. It's as if you're pushing emotions, truths, and desires to the back of a drawer, until the drawer can't close anymore. Chaos ensues when this drawer suddenly opens. The job that ends, the unexpected illness, the painful breakup, the deep existential crisis. Situations that seem to break us, but in fact are, revealing the cracks that already existed. Chaos doesn't create the problem, it reveals what was hidden. Jung didn't see chaos as something negative. To him, it was a sign that the unconscious was trying to enter into dialogue with the conscious. It was a natural movement of the psyche to seek balance, and like any healing process, this movement can be uncomfortable, but it can also be deeply necessary. An example of this is what Jung called the dark night of the soul, not in the religious sense, but in the psychological sense. It is the moment when we feel lost, directionless, isolated. It is like crossing an internal desert, but this desert is not empty. It is full of truths that were forgotten while you were living in automatic mode. This is where many people give up. Chaos is intense, it demands energy, it destabilizes everything, but it is also a turning point. Those who choose to go through this night, rather than run from it, discover a new kind of strength, a strength that comes not from the ego, but from an encounter with the self. The self, for Jung, is the deepest core of being, the part of you that knows, that feels, that is. Chaos takes us away from the ego and toward this more authentic center, but it only fulfills this role if you allow it to reveal, not just destroy. Think of chaos as a messenger. It comes loudly, yes. It knocks things over, it scares you, but it carries a message. Something in you is ready to change, but it cannot be born while you insist on being someone you are not. And that's why, after a breakdown, many people report a kind of clarity, as if, after the pain, a new outlook on life emerges. Relationships change, priorities shift. What once seemed essential no longer matters as much, and what was once ignored, like inner peace, silence, purpose, begins to take center stage. But to get there, you need to cross the chaos with presence. This means not running away from emotions, but observing them, not despairing over trials, but trying to understand them, asking, what is this situation trying to teach me? What is it in me that is being called to light now? It's a process of deep listening, of surrender, and most of all, of trust. Trust that even when everything seems dark, there is an intelligence behind the chaos, an intelligence that is guiding you closer to yourself. And when we begin to accept this invitation, the journey changes. We go from being victims of chance to active participants in our own rebirth process. But before this reconstruction can happen, something very important needs to come to light: the shadow. In the next chapter, we will talk about this hidden side of ourselves that chaos insists on revealing, and which, despite being frightening, holds the secret to our true transformation. The shadow that needs to be seen. After chaos invades, revealing the internal structures that no longer support our essence, something even deeper begins to emerge: the shadow. And this is perhaps the most challenging moment of the journey, because contrary to what many people think, the real obstacle is not always outside, it lives within us. Carl Jung dedicated much of his work to this concept. For him, the shadow represents everything that has been repressed, denied, or forgotten within the psyche. These are aspects of ourselves that do not match the idealized image we try to maintain in the world, and often not even in front of ourselves. These are the traits that we judge as ugly, weak, dangerous, or shameful. Old fears, repressed impulses, swallowed anger, unresolved traumas. And the curious thing is that the more we try to hide these fragments, the more strength they gain in the unconscious, until the day when, in the face of a crisis, they simply emerge without asking permission. The shadow reveals itself in many ways. Sometimes it appears as a disproportionate reaction to something small. Other times it appears as repetitive patterns, always the same conflicts, the same mistakes, the same types of people crossing our path. In some cases, it manifests itself through the body: anxiety, insomnia, psychosomatic illnesses. And in many others, It appears as a critical inner voice that sabotages every attempt at change. But there's something essential to understand. The shadow is not the enemy. It's actually a legitimate part of who you are, and it's asking to be acknowledged. Jung said that enlightenment is not achieved by imagining figures of light, but rather by making darkness conscious. This means that, in order to evolve, it is not enough to think positively or avoid suffering. You need to look head-on at what hurts, at what is hurting, at what has been hidden for so long that you have forgotten it even existed. This is where the universe or the unconscious really tests us. He puts situations in front of us that touch exactly these sensitive points. People who trigger us, circumstances that make us feel small, rejected, insufficient. Not to punish us, but to give us the chance to integrate what has not yet been accepted. Integrating the shadow does not mean acting like it, nor drowning in it. It means recognizing its existence and understanding its origin. It means understanding that uncontrolled anger may be a reflection of a childhood in which you were unable to defend yourself. That constant fear may come from an old abandonment. That excessive pride hides an insecurity that never had room to be healed. And when you start naming these pieces, something changes. You are no longer controlled by them. They don't disappear, but they stop screaming because they have been heard. And in that moment, a new energy is released. An energy that was trapped, suffocated, waiting to be transformed. This transformation is the heart of the journey. It's the point where you realize that you're not here to be perfect, but whole. That you no longer need to hide your flaws, because they're what make you human. That true strength isn't in pretending that nothing touches you, but in having the courage to know yourself completely. And here's a truth that may seem uncomfortable, but is liberating. You will only become truly free when you stop running from your own shadow. It's not about eliminating your dark parts, but about making peace with them. It's about understanding that within fear lives the desire for protection, that within anger lives a thirst for justice, that even in envy there is a call for something that is dormant within you and wants to blossom. The shadow, when integrated, becomes power. It transforms into creativity, empathy, firmness, wisdom. It stops sabotaging and starts serving, because now it is part of a conscious whole and not of a repressed field. And when you start walking with this new awareness, something different happens. The tests change. They continue to exist. After all, life is movement. But now you face them from another place, with more clarity, with more maturity, with more presence. And it's at this new level of awareness that a pattern begins to emerge. A kind of repetition that once seemed random but now takes on meaning. In the next chapter, we'll talk about this, about how tests repeat themselves until we're able to respond in a new way. We'll explore the cycle of unconscious patterns and how they're actually invitations to freedom. Repetitive patterns, the echo of testing. Have you ever found yourself living the same situation over and over again? As if, no matter how much you change places, people, or paths, certain problems insist on coming back. It's like a cycle that goes round and round, always leaving you facing the same kind of pain. At first glance, this may seem like bad luck or even persecution, but from a deeper perspective, this is your subconscious trying to communicate with you, and it has infinite patience. By the way, tell me in the comments, is there a pattern in your life that keeps repeating itself? Whether it's an emotion, a situation, or a type of person, share it here, because sometimes, just by recognizing it, something starts to change. Returning to the topic, for Jung, repetition is a way for the psyche to insist on what needs to be integrated. What is not resolved is repeated, and that is why tests come in cycles. You attract relationships that end the same way. You always encounter bosses who belittle you. You experience situations where you feel you need to prove your worth. External reality becomes a mirror of what your subconscious still wants you to see. And it's not punishment, it's coherence. The mind seeks repetition because it wants solutions, and the universe, or the unconscious, insists on these patterns until you are conscious enough to make different choices, until you stop reacting in the same way, and finally change from the inside out. This process requires attention, because it is easy to blame the world, to think that everything is against you. But when you start to observe these cycles more closely, important questions arise. What is this trying to teach me? What in me attracts, allows, or keeps this repetition alive? These questions are not about blame, but about responsibility. Taking responsibility is taking power, because if something in me participates in the pattern, then something in me can also change it. Jung said that when we project our shadow onto others, we lose the chance to know ourselves. And the repetition of tests is precisely the reflection of these unintegrated projections. It is as if life was saying, here it is again. Will you react the same way, or will you choose differently this time? And this choice is liberating, because the moment you react in a new way, the cycle breaks. The same situation arises, but the response is different. You say no where you were silent before. You step back where you were insistent before. You embrace your truth where you hid before. And it is at that moment that reality begins to change. This change is not magical or immediate, but it is real. Repetition loses its power when you begin to act from a new level of consciousness, and this is a milestone in the journey of transformation. You begin to realize that you are no longer going in circles, you are spiraling upward, and with each turn you see the same lessons with more clarity, more maturity, more depth. In the next chapter, we will talk about what happens when this new awareness takes hold, about the moment when you deliberately choose to walk toward your essence. This is when the process of individuation begins, the true rebirth of your inner identity, conscious choice, and the process of individuation. When you realize that patterns are not enemies, but messages, that chaos is not punishment, but a push, and that the shadow is not a threat, but part of your very being, something changes profoundly. It is at this point in the journey that a new possibility arises, that of consciously choosing the path of transformation. This choice is neither simple nor quick. It requires vigilance, willingness, and a dose of humility. But it is this choice that initiates one of the most powerful processes in depth psychology, the process of individuation. For Carl Jung, individuation is becoming what you are in essence. It is the path of integration between the conscious and the unconscious, between light and shadow, between what you show and what you are. It is about stopping living according to the persona and starting to build a life that reflects your most intimate truth. And this process begins with a silent decision. I don't want to live on autopilot anymore. I want to become whole. From then on, tests stop being punishments and become teachers. Every emotion is a signal, every discomfort an invitation, every obstacle an opportunity to act differently. You start to move out of reactive mode and into creative mode. The difference between the two is subtle but transformative. In reactive mode, you are pushed by circumstances. In creative mode, you respond with awareness. The world may still be challenging, but you now have deeper inner roots. You no longer need to protect yourself through escape, denial, or repetition. You begin to choose, and these choices shape your new reality. Individuation does not mean becoming perfect. On the contrary, it is the abandonment of the illusion of perfection. It is recognizing one's own imperfections, and even so, moving forward with integrity. It is living in coherence with what one has discovered in the silence of the soul, even if it means swimming against the current. As you progress along this path, life around you begins to respond. Relationships do change. Some dissolve, others grow stronger. Work, interests, habits. Everything begins to align with this new inner vibration. But above all, it changes your relationship with yourself. You start to listen to yourself more. You start to trust your intuition. You start to embrace your emotions without drowning in them. And most importantly, you start to respect yourself, because now you know who you are becoming, and even without having all the answers, you feel like you are heading in the right direction. This is the moment when the new begins to form. And even though the old tries to pull you back, something inside you refuses to return, because the taste of authenticity is too strong to be forgotten. In the next chapter, we will talk about the signs of this transformation. How? Do you know if you are, in fact, moving towards individuation? How do you recognize that the reality around you has already begun to reflect this inner change? There are clues, evidence, subtleties, and they all show that the universe is no longer testing you. It is beginning to respond. The signs of transformation. Once you've moved through the chaos, looked at the shadow and made conscious choices, you'll start to notice small changes. Nothing too dramatic at first. but something in the air, something in the way you feel, perceive, and react starts to feel different. These are the first signs of transformation. Before continuing, if this content has brought you important reflections, please leave a like. This shows that we are on the right path together and helps more people find this same journey. Now let's get to the point. How do you recognize that your reality is in fact starting to change? The first clue is usually internal. You realize that something that once deeply destabilized you now has less impact. A comment that once hurt you, a situation that once paralyzed you, no longer carries the same weight. This doesn't mean you've become a rock. It means your roots are deeper. This emotional stability does not come from escape but from presence. And this is a clear sign that the process of individuation has begun to consolidate. You no longer react automatically. You breathe, observe, choose. Another important sign: synchronicities. Jung was one of the first to give this phenomenon a name. Synchronicity is when external events coincide significantly with your internal state, like thinking about someone and that person calling you, or hearing a phrase that answers an old question, or finding by chance a book that talks exactly about what you are experiencing. These moments are not mere coincidences. They are symbolic signs that the outer world is responding to your new inner alignment. It is as if the universe is saying, yes, you are on the path. Keep going. Additionally, new connections begin to emerge. People who resonate with your new energy. More authentic relationships. Conversations that nourish rather than drain. You naturally distance yourself from environments that you once frequented out of obligation or fear of being alone. Now you choose quality over quantity. And the funny thing is that even when challenges come up, and they keep coming up, you no longer feel like you're being tested. You understand that it's all part of the flow. There's a quiet trust in the process. You no longer need everything to be solved to feel peace, because peace now comes from within. Another indication that your reality is changing is the desire to serve. When you begin to heal, you naturally feel the desire to help others, not out of obligation but out of empathy. You recognize the pain in others because you have already recognized it in yourself, and with that, you become a channel of transformation, not only for yourself, but for those around you. And finally, there is a feeling that is hard to explain but impossible to ignore. You feel more like yourself, not like someone who has reached a final destination, but like someone who is, finally, on the right path. The path back home, inward. You began this journey in the midst of chaos, perhaps confused, tired, feeling as though you were being tested by life. And now, looking back, you may realize that each step, no matter how painful, was leading you back to yourself. It's not about erasing the past or pretending nothing happened. It's about recognizing that the collapse didn't come to destroy you, but to make room, so that, in place of masks, truth could be born. So that, in place of control, trust could emerge. So that, in place of fear, presence could flourish. Carl Jung taught us that the process of individuation is, above all, a reunion, a return to wholeness, to what you already were, but had forgotten. And every test, every pattern, every shadow that appeared along the way was there not as an obstacle, but as a messenger, showing what still needed to be seen, felt, accepted. Today, you may not have all the answers yet, and that's okay. The important thing is that you are no longer in the same place inside that you started from. You have allowed yourself to look within, and that in itself is an act of rare courage. So remember, the universe is not against you, it is moving with you. And sometimes that movement requires deconstruction before creation, but in the end everything aligns. If this message touched something in you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Here, we continue this journey of awareness, healing, and truth, and you are very welcome.